Up next, we discuss the revelation that a member of Congress has been absent from her job and living in an assisted living facility for dementia patients for like the past 6 months. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man whose takes can be as explosive as fireworks on New Year's Eve. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to give people something for the night today?
Yeah, it's funny because I just disappointed my youngest kid that I didn't buy fireworks this year. And so
it's not too late, man. It's not too late.
So, well played, sir. I told him, well, our neighbor's got better fireworks than I ever buy, so let's just go to his house. I was like, I'll bring the bottle of bourbon. He'll take the fireworks. My kid didn't seem to understand that.
Everybody contributes something. Yeah. And besides, you're bringing your takes, man. So that's the explosion you got, man.
Exactly. I appreciate that. Good segue.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, that's your kid, though. Now,
he'll watch the show and he'll get a laugh. So
there you go. If you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. Now, we're recording this on December 31st, 2024. And it was recently revealed that Texas Republican Kay Granger has not only missed all of her votes, all of the required votes in the House since the House of Representatives since June, but is in fact been living in an assisted living facility for dementia patients for the past few months. Now, at this point, many of us probably have a built-in sensitivity on this kind of story because we've seen in recent times reports of government officials, such as Senator Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden even, having age-related diminished capacity while serving elected, their terms. But even with that, I mean, I think that serving a term or serving out your term while living in an assisted living facility probably is pushing things even further than what we've seen. So, Tunde, to get us started, what is your reaction to this revelation that we've had a member of Congress living in an assisted living facility as opposed to like being in Congress?
On a serious note, I feel like I should be more surprised and shocked than I am. And I would say I'm extremely disappointed to learn that. That's what I mean. It's disappointing, but it's not surprising based on what you had just said before about basically, I was going to say this president, but I was going to say the one before him and the one that's coming back. So, just kind of like this. We've been swimming between these old people for a while, right?
Yeah.
And then it makes me think of the leadership in both parties, right? We have an outgoing Senate majority
Mitch
leader.
McConnell, they're questioning
82.
whether he had a stroke in the middle of a speech.
Well, no, I mean, that's a year ago. Let's talk about right now. He just had his farewell, retirement speech. And all due respect to him, looked like he just came out of a boxing match. He had a Band-Aid under his eye. He was in his sling because he's been falling a lot because he's 82. Yeah. I learned in reading today that Nancy Pelosi, we know she's 84. She broke her hip this year on a foreign trip representing the United States as a congressperson. So, that's why I say I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised because we all know we're here. That's why I make the joke about the fact we got to choose between, again, people that are so old that they should be retired and enjoying this part of their life and not forcing us to have to deal with them and allowing, I would say more importantly than that comment, is allowing our system to refresh and replenish kind of the tree, so to speak, through bringing up newer, younger people with newer ideas, newer energy, so on and so forth. And
allowing them to rise, because a part of what we're seeing here is that this elder class of people seems to inadvertently and intentionally keeping down or keeping out the younger people.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things at play. I think at an individual level, I'm pretty sure a lot of these people just have hubris, whether they would admit it or not, which is, I'm so good and no one else can really do this but me and I'm still good at it, don't. And so that's one thing. I think there is something, and, we can go into this later in this discussion. There's a very few in a large society that can benefit from dysfunction, right? And when I look at who some of these people are, this Representative Granger, right now, she's still the chairwoman of the Congressional Appropriations Committee.
Yeah.
That is one of the most powerful positions in the U.S. Congress, because they appropriate money to whatever Congress is supposed to fund. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so this is an interesting conversation, James. As I was preparing, I said, because this is what I think one of the roots of American unhappiness, but we don't recognize it because of how partisan everyone is.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is Joe Biden is a Democrat and he's president of the United States as of right now, right? And for the next few weeks. Kay Granger is a congresswoman who's a Republican in Texas.
Yeah. She
is the chairwoman of the Congressional Appropriations Committee, and the Congress has been led by a majority Republicans over the last 2 years. The co-equal branches of government, the way it's supposed to work is Congress has just as much power and authority in certain things as the executive branch is Joe Biden, and they're supposed to negotiate and come together.
Yeah.
And that's how things get funded for the American people. And so what happens is we now learn that we have the chair of that committee to appropriate money to take care of American stuff is in a nursing home since July with dementia. That is what causes dysfunction in a system. And that is not a partisan statement. That's not against Democrats or Republicans. That's saying we as Americans have been asking for adults to run this country. And for some reason, both parties have haven't behaved like adults.
It's not for some reason, though. That's the thing. Yeah. You identified it already. Partisanship prevents us from being able to deal with this issue. Because if you're people who are Republicans are sitting here pointing at Joe Biden and all up in arms, but then they'll look the other way with Kay Granger. And then people that are Democrats, Democratic Party will be like, oh, well, look at Kay Granger. Oh, but then with Biden, no, we're not as upset about that. And so partisanship prevents us from actually addressing a substantive issue because we're only looking at it and we're only willing to address it from a partisan lens.
Yeah.
When I look at this, I'm like, at first I'm thinking, okay, is this something about this particular generation, this baby boomer generation? And my inclination was first to look at that. I'm like, oh, this generation is a very self-centered generation, or what can we say about the baby boomer generation that has them? Because this is happening in business as well. We've seen many the people that had risen to the top aren't moving off the perch voluntarily to let the next group come up. But looking at it more closely, I'm wondering if this is more of a technical / medical issue. And then also the demands of these different jobs can be handled as people age better than they could in the past. And I wonder if previous generations essentially would have done the same thing if they could have, if they were able to work jobs in their 80s, and not just physically be unable to from a medical standpoint or from a technological standpoint. They just couldn't do it anymore. And it was obvious, it was plain. It was just, or they wouldn't live as long, and they weren't able to. But I just wonder that as a society now, we've gotten to the point where because people can live very long, and our average age has risen, average age that people live to is in the 70s. So your outliers are going to be commonly in the 80s and, not even that wide of an outlier, but in the 80s and so forth. And then the demands, the physical demands, the mental demands on the job can be managed in such a sense that an 83-year-old or an 80-something-year-old can still kind of at least give the appearance of doing it. And so maybe it's less that this generation is more selfish than every other generation. It's just that the environment that has been created is one that they can hang on longer than other generations could have, like just from an actual standpoint. And so, but that begets that then it's like, okay, well then this isn't going to be the first time this happens. Like this is more of a trend that people can do this. So, you have to take more seriously the idea of maybe we need to put some self-correcting mechanisms in place to address the fact that now people can work and handle jobs at least on a surface level, much longer and much past their capacity to really perform in those jobs. Whereas, again, 100 years ago, you just wouldn't have lived this long. Or if you did, you wouldn't have been able to been mobile enough to even give the appearance that you could still do this thing. And so I think it's an issue that we're going to have to get a handle on as a society, like whether that's term limits, whether that's an age limit. There's a lower age limit for plenty of jobs, or you got to be at least X age in order to work here. So it's not like we're immune to age limits. And so whether we have to deal with age limits or so forth, and because I think we're seeing the beginning of a problem here that is tied to the way people can, or the ability for people to give the appearance that they can handle a job for longer and then just living longer, which otherwise is progress.
Yeah, no, I feel you. So you said there's two specific things you touched on that I want to continue because they could be totally separate discussions. So I don't want to go too long into them. But number one, I think you're right about the technology, just where humanity's come in the last 50, 70 years. Is part of why the baby boom generation is behaving this way. I mean, they're human beings, right? So I don't think that this is unique to them. I think had it been 200 years ago, humans started living to the mid 80s life expectancy, we would have seen it back then. And if it took another 200,
there were questions of whether, like Ronald Reagan, for example, was
correct. Yeah.
Towards the end of his term and so forth.
Yeah.
But he was very old, at that time.
But remember when he was the oldest president ever elected at 73, I think it was.
Yeah.
Which at this point,
we beat that now.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying 73 doesn't seem old at all for a politician anymore. That's just like, all right, and so that says something about us. Maybe we need to reflect on that. So that was the one thing that you said that I wanted to touch on, which is yes, because here's interesting. This is just anecdotal now. I just had a really nice long conversation with an old friend I hadn't talked to in a while. And just good esoteric stuff and all that about life. But one of the things that came up, because I had just come off of 100-degree fever from having the flu and also surgery on my foot. So we're kind of talking about health and stuff like that, and got into this conversation about longevity. And he's a real big tech guy. So he's into all this stuff with the AI and everything. And he believes that in our lifetime, you and I may have the opportunity to live to 150 years old. I don't believe that. That's why I said this is a separate show discussion. But what I thought of,
preparing to be able to do that.
That's for sure. That's why I had the flu and surgery. But the reason I bring it up is because in preparing for today's show and just reading, it came to my mind like these are the conversations. Again, we go online and we're looking at if you go on social media, everybody wants to live forever, right? And we did the discussion about the multimillionaire guy that spent millions of dollars already. And he's around my age. I think he's 46, 47. And his biological age is now 25 or something. And remember, he never goes in the sun. He doesn't eat anything that tastes good, all that kind of stuff. So
definitely not having a bourbon or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. He never has that. But that's my point. Like, okay, so if we have these fantasies that we want to do this as a society, go live double our life expectancy. Again, that's what I was going to say. I think these are the conversations we should be having. What are we going to do with all these people when they're at a certain point and they've been in a job for 75 years? Like, are we just going to let them still do it? Can they be alive at that age? But like you're saying now, are they going to have cognitive declines? How do we deal with that? So I just think this all brings up other conversations. And then the other thing you mentioned too is I think our society has continued to grapple, and this isn't going to be anything that ends anytime soon, or maybe never ends, depending on what's learned about the human mind going forward. We still don't recognize that the mind is as sensitive as the body. Yeah. And that just like our bodies deteriorate, like you said, it's easy for us to recognize that back in the 1930s, let's say, when the industrial age was just 100 years old or so, and we had been building big skyscrapers in cities like New York, and the Empire State Building was built and all that. The idea that, okay, by 65, most humans still were out there doing some kind of labor back, 100 years ago or so, right?
Not so just that. Let me throw something in with that real quick, because I didn't give this context. Like even the demands for travel, like, I got to do an overseas trip. Well, the demands for an overseas trip 100 years ago, 120 years ago, are much greater than the physical demand for an overseas trip. Now you just hop on a chartered, amazing plane, go to sleep, and you're there somewhere. Like you're halfway around the world when you wake up. So the demands for these types of jobs, just to get from place to place, or like I'm a representative in Texas, I got to take a train for however long just to get to DC, and it's all this crazy, like it's temperature control is not really where it is, and there's all types of stuff happening, like with that. And so it's just the physical demands are much less just for little things that we don't even think about.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I think but for everybody, right, in the 1920s and 30s, most men were doing something laborious, either working on the construction site or in some sort of small business where they were like a meat packing business where they still had to get up and move around and carry stuff. And then a lot of women were either domestics or working something where there was also physical. So the bottom line was, the idea was that around 65, a human body kind of couldn't take it anymore. That's when Social Security was kind of invented to say, at least someone should be able to live this last part of their life with some level of dignity. That was the idea of Social Security.
And they couldn't earn a living anymore, or they couldn't really be able to handle their own affairs physically anymore.
Exactly. I guess, getting them the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy, food, shelter, and all that. That's what they should do, since you can't go earn it yourself. And I think we haven't brought that to, we recognize that with the physical body, but not everybody is recognizing it with the mental. And I know that it's very sensitive because, people don't want to be accused of being crazy or having dementia or Alzheimer's when they don't. And it's a very sensitive topic. So and that's why I say that could be a totally separate show, but it's more like, these are all the conversations we need to be having.
That's part of the conversation we need to have if we're going to discuss. Again, there is a lower age limit. You have to be at least 35 to run for president. There's a certain age minimum you have to be in order to run for Congress. And so for those, we don't have a bunch of people out there questioning that. Oh, why is that? Yada, yada, yada. And so it seems like we can very easily get to the conversation of an upper age limit. Now, what the upper age limit would be is a whole nother thing, because then you're going to have a bunch of interested parties arguing about that. All the 70-year-olds will say, oh, well, it must be 80 something. All the 60-year-olds will say, oh, it must be 70 something. So either way, I mean, there was one other thing you mentioned, though, where I thought you might go, but you didn't. But it may raise even more, whether our bodies can live until we're 150, now and then within our lifetime. We definitely may end up with something where your mind can live longer, whether it be some combination of AI and some type of ability to transplant consciousness or something like that. Our science fiction's there. So science might get there pretty soon. And that'll raise a whole nother question. If my mind is over here and my body can't do it anymore, but my mind is still sharp because it's housed here and it's my consciousness and so forth. Are we going to have to deal with that at some point? Disembodied consciousnesses, oh, well, I got elected, man. I'm serving out my term as a disembodied consciousness as opposed to, having to give up to let go, because it just doesn't seem like what the lesson here is, that it just doesn't seem like, from a human nature standpoint, that people in power, the people that rise to these positions, a lot of time, they have to have a certain amount of self-belief and, what'd you say, hubris or whatever, just to get there, to deal with all the crap you got to deal with to get there. And so it's self-selecting in that way, so that they're not going to be the ones that say, oh, well, you know what, for the good of everything else, I probably should, I probably had my time. That's not going to be their inclination. So societally, we're just going to have to come up with ways to deal with it. And the issue's probably going to get more complicated, not less complicated in the short term. So before we wrap this up, man, you got anything else?
I'm going to tell you that you just gave me an idea. I'm going to invent a new political party called, it's just going to be MIGA. Unfortunately, I can't put an A in there. It's MGGA, Make Ghosts Great Again, because you just
disembodied consciousness.
Disembodied consciousness. We're actually going to invent ghosts, which is going to be cool, because with technology, that's freaking cool.
And they're going to run for Congress in your political party, I take it.
Yeah. You know what? I think I saw that in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, that they had these ghost suits. So, that could be some whole interesting other technology. But but on a serious note, the one thing I did want to discuss, because one of the articles that we do have cited in the show notes, I just want to actually take from it, because it shows the importance of this conversation. That's why I do just be serious here at the end. It's about brain volume. This is something I just learned interesting, want to share as well. Brain volume, I guess, based on scientific research, begins to decline by about 5% per decade after peaking in one's 30s. And this is one thing I thought of too, James, when I was preparing. I was reminding with all this reading, human beings kind of were designed in nature. If you look at hunter-gatherers and all that, just how humans were, let's say 10,000 plus years ago, probably to live to about 35 to 40 years old. People generally out there, like you said, in the wilderness, when you didn't have the comforts of now and the things that humans were able to develop with the cognitive revolution, the body just deteriorated, or you got killed, or you got injured, whatever. And so it stands to reason that the brain also begins to kind of suffer from entropy and kind of deterioration and corrosion of just nature just like the body does after peaking during a human life. And so it got me thinking, I'll be 47 in March. I've already lost a portion of that, that 5 to, going on to 10% of that stuff. And I was joking with my wife because I'm mixing up my kids' names now. I'm starting to do that. And I was just laughing like, I don't remember doing that stuff 10 years ago. So it's an example.
But that's the thing, though. If you did it, you may not remember that you did it 10 years ago. But I'll say this.
Don't make me feel worse about myself here. No, but here's all I was going to say to finish it is through its connections to other parts of the brain, it manages executive function. And then I go a little bit forward. It's key to discussion of leadership capacities because it's involved in areas like problem solving, goal setting, and impulse control. Yeah. So I'm just saying that connective tissue in the brain, as it starts to deteriorate, people begin to lose those kind of skills. And those are the skills you want someone who's in a position of leadership to make sure that they have those things going on. So that's what I'm just saying is that it's about that really.
Yeah, no, and I think it's worthwhile to end on a idea of why this matters. I'm always I stay skeptical of science, so, and that's part of what you're supposed to do, so like equating brain volume to brain capability, I would want more before I walk down that road. So, because brain connectivity and what you did get to secondly, matters a lot more with that. And then the brain, we don't know all the ways in the brain works. So for us to try to make sense of it from the outside at this point is still, we're filling in a lot of gaps there. But that said, we're not breaching some new horizon here that no one's ever thought of here. Like we all have observed that human beings decline as they age, like we have systems in society built in to take advantage of that or to account for that and to cover for that in many respects. So, as you get older, your requirements on maintaining your driver's license change. Like just things that we allow people to, your ability to fly airplanes if you want changes. So like it's already built in. We shouldn't have to convince people that this is something we need to look at. In many areas of society, we already have decided that this is something we need to look at and pay attention to. And what I'm saying is that things have changed enough in our society that we're going to have to look at this in leadership as well. In the same way that when they set the whole thing up, they were like, yeah, we don't want a bunch of 18-year-olds trying to run for Congress or trying to run for president because all of these things that we know about 18-year-olds. And so at this point, they probably just didn't have a big enough issue with 85-year-olds trying to run the country that it didn't come up. It was just like, oh yeah, well that's
that would be like us trying to write in some legislation about someone who's 130 today.
Exactly. It just
you would say, why are you doing that?
Just like, so now that our capabilities have changed, it's something we have to take more seriously because yes, we do want. For a lot of different reasons, as you get older, remember you're more entrenched a lot of times in different fights that may be 30 or 40 years old at that point. And so refreshing the tree of information and knowledge and just bringing new blood in is helpful. And I'll give a sports analogy and just to get out of here with like, it's common in many sports where like, if a coach has been somewhere so long, it's just like, look, it's not that you're not a good coach anymore, but we just need a new voice. Like, as a team, like the team has heard your voice for so long that it's just not as impactful anymore. We need to move on. So this idea is not something we're throwing in from left field that nobody's ever heard of. Just the idea of, hey, you got to refresh leadership from time to time so that you can move forward is pretty well established. And so again, because our capabilities have changed, we got to assess whether or not we need to bring that in there, to what extent we need to bring that into qualifications for leadership in our government of the people, by the people, for the people. So
yeah,
I think we can
wrap right, man. And look, the mechanism's already there, bro. We got elections in this country every 2 to 4 years.
That's true too.
It is on us.
The finger should be pointed. If we're talking about Kay Granger, then the finger should be pointed at the people in her district in Texas that put her in office at this point, or the people of Kentucky with Mitch McConnell, and it's like. Or, the United States people when they elected Joe Biden or when they elected, Donald Trump. But again, we didn't have much of a choice at that point. I guess we did, but initially when it was two old guys going against each other.
Listen, man, I'll say this to end it. That's why I am proud of my suffering from Dunning-Kruger syndrome, because I'm just going to assume that my anecdotal example of me screwing up my kid's name is exactly why I'm right. So that's case closed. Science.
How very human of you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
But no, I think we can wrap from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this part. Check out the later parts of this episode, and we'll talk to you then.